once you get it through to them that this is being used for this purpose, people become very curious about, well, why would this work? Why is this something that works potentially? And they become just very curious about it. And anytime someone is very curious about something, that means that they are trying to assimilate new information in their existing schema about themselves, others, or the world, or how things work. And then that means that they are much more open and interested in it and will consider it and will tell others about it. And even if they don't completely understand, but they're perfectly capable of completely understanding. And so I think it's really, I think, and even in the psychology field, so I'm publishing more in psychology specific journals. And when I go through the peer review process, often they really want me to expand my papers out into all the underlying mechanisms by which ketogenic diets can work for mental illness. And often I have to say, oh, no, no, that's not this kind of paper. There are lots of those papers over in psychiatry that I can reference for that purpose. But that means the psychologists who are peer reviewing my papers are actually super interested and want to understand this better. So I'm not sure that that is a dissemination. I'm thinking that would be really hard to kind of measure, but I feel like there's just such powerful momentum around this more and more. Shimani Sethi and several co-authors just published something in Nature about this, which is the highest tier journal. So that is it's just really good, Casey. I think that it's people are more and more open to it. I continue I'm as optimistic, possibly more so than the first episode when you asked me a similar question around that.
Okay, good. That's really great to hear. And I want to talk about a consensus statement that you were involved in here in a second. But before we go there, I thought it was really interesting. You were asked a question on another interview, and you pointed out a difference that I had not really considered. And I'd like to talk about, like you said, what are some of the benefits of a ketogenic diet as far as mental health goes, like how that works. We've talked about that before, but I think it's a good thing to kind of revisit. But that you were asked a question, and you had to point out that there's a difference between nutritional psychology and metabolic psychology. So can you talk about what that difference is? I was not really aware of this. I hadn't thought about it like this.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm not sure. I can't remember that particular podcast that you're talking about, but um oh, yes, nutritional psychology and oh yes. So I think more of it is nutritional psychiatry and or psychology and metabolic psychiatry or psychology. Um and so they're a little bit interchanging, but yes, so nutritional psychiatry and metabolic psychiatry are related but different. So, psychology or psychiatry really kind of focuses on things like gut microbiome composition, what foods can improve, mental illness, that sort of thing. It's very much the blueberries help with Alzheimer's kind of thing. It's very much a lot of associational studies, stuff like that. And in nutritional psychiatry and psychology, you know, micronutrient status, of course, matters a great deal. And there's much to offer in nutritional psychiatry and psychology. Absolutely. Metabolic psychiatry and psychology, of course, are very, very interested in micronutrient status because you have to have adequate micronutrient status or optimal even for mitochondrial function. All those pathways that make your neurotransmitters, they use micronutrients. And so they'll, of course, look at the metabolic effects of micronutrient deficiency or insufficiencies in metabolic psychiatry. But really, it's about a shift. It's a shift in energy. It's an increase in mitochondrial function. It is thinking about the energy dynamics of the brain and the body and how that changes everything, the whole landscape, and how that addresses mental illness in a way that nutritional psychiatry and psychology perhaps cannot. So there's many people who have taken a multivitamin and played with probiotics and attempted to shift their gut microbiome and have tried different, blueberries and salmon and increasing different foods to try to increase their health or their mental health. And many people get better that way, but there are people where that true metabolic shift that is part of the toolkit of metabolic psychiatry is really required.
Yeah. Well, all those things sound really nice. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, as you're listing those things, like, that's all really great. That doesn't even like touch the power of metabolic psychiatry when it comes to like a ketogenic diet. So how do you kind of get that message across that like what we're talking about as far as metabolic ketogenic psychiatry, how do you talk about the power of what it can truly do for people?
Yeah, so the way I kind of think about that is yes, maybe there has been in the past individuals with seizures that have increased their micronutrient intake and got better. I haven't read a case study about that. Um, but a ketogenic diet is a metabolic intervention that can stop seizures when all other medications fail. And focusing on your blueberry intake and your salmon intake and taking a multivitamin will not. And so that's kind of the best way to kind of get through to people that this is a totally different level of intervention.
Yeah. You were also asked a little bit about exogenous ketones. So we know that the body can burn fat as a fuel source and produce ketones that are water soluble, can be a great fuel for the brain. We also know we can make ketones, or we can have, different oils, for example, like MCT oil that is very ketogenic. They're not
Hmm.
ketones, but they turn into ketones quite quickly. Where are we at as far as like the latest research of like people that maybe don't want to completely change their diet? They don't want to go fully ketogenic. Chris Palmer always argues that the diet is really challenging for people and that kind of thing, and not everybody's going to do it. I like to contrast that with the way you approach it and what you've told us in the past, that what you're going through is already very, very difficult, and changing your diet is not
Yeah.
going to be that hard. I love that approach. But anyway, like when it comes to research around exogenous ketones or ways our body can produce ketones, what is the difference? How do you explain the difference between those two things to somebody?
You know, um, there's a metabolic shift, a true metabolic shift that happens when you do the diet that I think changes things differently than just adding exogenous ketones. Like I know a lot, and Chris would say this too. You can not do a ketogenic diet and you can take lots of exogenous ketones and you may or may not get treatment benefits. And we don't know who needs to be on a ketogenic diet with exogenous ketones and who can just get away with taking exogenous ketones. Like we don't have the answers to that question anymore. Um, and it's the diet like you said, yeah, the diet is challenging, but it's not as challenging as having these really terrible mental illness symptoms and low energy and feeling like crap all the time. And so um yeah, I just have such a different experience with it. I don't even think about it as being that difficult. I mean, I acknowledge that people's capacity is low when they start the ketogenic diet, and that makes it feel very overwhelming. But again, being debilitated by anxiety every morning, first thing when you wake up, that's much harder than beginning to change the items in your kitchen,
Yeah.
stuff like that. So I have a very different kind of viewpoint.
Yeah. And again, I don't think they're contrasting viewpoints. I think both of you can be right. I think Chris can say this is going to be challenging for people. Not everybody can do it. You can say like I think it's not that incredibly hard. And
Yeah.
I'm not treating people. I don't. Chris sees people. You see people. I don't treat people. But through this podcast, I've been able to talk to a lot of people, and maybe it's just because I'm talking to the people that did do the diet, and so it's a little bit
Successfully.
self-selecting there.
Yeah.
But I kind of agree with you a little bit more that like these people, like maybe it was difficult in the beginning, but it wasn't that hard, and it was like they were getting better the whole time. It's not like they fixed it immediately overnight, but it felt a
Right.
little bit better one day, and then the next day, and the next day, and then all of a sudden you're eating delicious food, and it's pretty simple and not that expensive. And I kind of see that experience a little bit more than the people that you tried it and it was just so overwhelming.
Yeah. And Chris talks about that. Like 3 weeks in, people are like, screw you, I'm not doing this diet. This is too hard. And he tells them Just stay with it for 3 months and you will be telling me how easy this diet is. And
Yep.
so, yeah, he totally knows.
That's awesome. Okay, so let's talk about your recent involvement in this consensus paper that came out.
Mhm.
What was the origin of this? What was the goal? I kind of read through everything and saw all the different steps, but how did you get involved, and what was the goal of this paper?
Yeah, so I was asked to be one of the people to contribute in the first few rounds where we came up with the questions in such a way that we could then put them out into the world with other practitioners that specifically use it for this purpose. And so yeah, I was just asked to be on it, and it was wonderful. And the Delphi consensus, the point of it was to have some kind of agreement among clinicians and people who actually use the diet hands-on with individuals that can help guide. Um, Now, it's really important to not think about the Delphi consensus as guidelines, as clinical guidelines, because that's not what was published. A clinical guideline is something different that goes through a different process. A Delphi consensus can be used in the as part of the many references and resources that are used to create a true a clinical document, guideline document. So that's important to kind of understand. But yeah, it was a great experience, and I think that the level of consensus that we reached was actually very encouraging because it means that it isn't just done willy-nilly. It's not a whole bunch of different practitioners who think it should be done many, many, many different ways. So we've seen patterns as clinicians that we agree upon where we see better outcomes than others, and we have many of the same considerations that we draw upon when we decide whether to use it or not use it or recommend it and how we do so.